Several pilots, apparently, and United Airlines workers at Chicago's O'Hare swear they saw one, a UFO. They say it hovered over a terminal without lights before shooting straight up right through the clouds last fall.
In 2004, a U.S. aircraft carrier was stalked for several days by a UFO that witnesses said resembled a supersonic tic-tac. The object reportedly could hover in midair and make itself invisible.
Agent Guy Hoddle, then head of the FBI's Washington field office, writes that an Air Force investigator stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Not only that, each one was occupied by...
What do you believe? I've been interested in UFOs for many years. I've seen dozens of documentaries, I've read many books on the subject. I even went to Roswell for the 50th anniversary of the crash. But I've never been lucky enough to see a UFO with my own eyes. I'd love to see one, right in front of me.
That is their own eyes, dude. Well, if there's look at that thing. It's rotating.
And I want to see it dart off instantaneously like no aircraft from this world ever could. Lots of other people have been lucky enough to see a UFO, and even aliens. I'm sure that if a scientist saw a UFO with their own eyes, they'd know they're real with 100% certainty. But scientists don't seem to accept other people's eyewitness accounts as proof, so they conclude that there is no evidence for extraterrestrial visitation. They're certain of that.
For all I know, we may be visited by a different extraterrestrial civilization every second Tuesday. But there's no support for this appealing idea. The extraordinary claims are not supported by extraordinary evidence.
But UFOs don't really fit into the scientific method. There are no experiments you can design and nothing is repeatable. And the people who might have actual evidence might have a reason to keep it from you. How do you apply the scientific method to a subject when the government might be trying to keep you from understanding it? And on top of all this, if you are a legitimate scientist, our society has been conditioned to ridicule you for wasting your time on it.
This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
But there's another way to look at this subject. I'm going to show you that there are a few questions we can answer with good confidence, and that these questions lead to a surprising result. To work this out, we're going to use statistics, and one formula will be particularly important. This equation tells us that if the chance of an event happening for one trial is t, then if we repeat the trial n times, the chance that the event happens at least once is a, as given by the equation. So, for example, suppose every time we roll the dice, the chance of rolling a 6 is 17%. Then, if we roll the dice 10 times, the chance of getting a 6 at least once is 84%. The first question is there life elsewhere? The universe began about 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang. After about 9 billion years, the Earth was formed. In about 1 billion years, life began. Finally, here we are about 3 billion years later. Assume there was another Earth-like planet somewhere in the universe that experienced about the same amount of randomness in its first billion years. What are the chances life would have formed there too? Well, the spark of life is a statistical process that arises from a large number of very improbable random conditions. So the likelihood of life starting after a given time should be a bell curve, where the peak is the most likely time. So it's reasonable to expect another Earth-like planet will also develop life after about 1 billion years. But let's be conservative and assume the chances are 1% that it develops life at all. Now suppose there are 1,000 such planets. According to our formula, the chances that life formed on one of them would be about 100%.
So life appeared on Earth within 500 million years of it being possible, which is short compared to the 10 billion year lifetime of a planet of Earth type. This suggests that the probability of life appearing is reasonably high.
But there are expected to be about 40 billion Earth-like planets in the Goldilocks zone in our own galaxy. And there are about 200 billion galaxies. So not only should we expect there to be life out there, but there should be countless life forms. Are there advanced civilizations? It's taken 13 billion years for humans to exist and start looking for other civilizations. Chances are that we're average, so it's reasonable to assume that that's the average time it takes. That means that about half of all civilizations are likely to be more advanced than us. And on this scale, most are easily more than 1 million years ahead of us. But scientists are aware of life-friendly planetary systems that formed 8 billion years earlier than ours. So if there are many civilizations, there are bound to be many that are much more advanced than us.
But there are stars which are billions of years older than our sun. Some of them very likely have planets, and therefore I can imagine civilizations immensely beyond the capabilities of our own.
Is intergalactic space travel possible? Not for us right now, but it may be possible for advanced civilizations. We answer this question by noting that if even one UFO story is true, then we know intergalactic space travel is possible. Since we don't have any hard evidence, we turn to statistics. If you're like me, you've heard some very compelling UFO stories with multiple witnesses, marks in the ground, radiation burns, radar returns, and other significant evidence. And these stories have no earthly explanation. So let's assign probabilities to them. For me, there are 5 or 6 compelling stories that I would give more than a 50% chance of being true. According to our formula, if we have 6 stories with each having a 50% chance of being true, the chances are 98% that at least one of them is true. But don't take my word for it. Between 1952 and 1970, the US government's Project Blue Book was the official point of contact for all UFO sightings. In that time, they documented over 12,000 witness reports. Even though it has later been revealed that Project Blue Book was highly biased to explain away credible sightings, they still listed 701 sightings as unexplained. In these cases, they had credible witness testimony, corroborating radar data, pictures, films, physical evidence such as scorch marks, radiation traces, and more. So let's use our equation in the most skeptical way and assign only a 1% chance of an extraterrestrial explanation to all 701 of their most compelling cases. When we plug this in, we see that there is a 99.9% chance that at least one of the cases is extraterrestrial. From this, we conclude that intergalactic space travel is possible. And if it's possible, then thousands of civilizations have discovered it and are using it now. Do advanced civilizations conquer less advanced civilizations? Let's look at the most likely history of alien beings. In early times, each alien planet would have been home to many varied regional cultures, just like humans on Earth. As the cultures populate and become more technological, they begin to clash for global resources. Cultures evolve and are subject to the laws of survival of the fittest. We have every reason to expect that eventually all the regional cultures get assimilated through conflict into the dominant culture to create a single global culture. By the laws of survival of the fittest, it's self-evident that the dominant culture was likely the most aggressive, most resource-hungry, most greedy, most ruthless, most interested in reproducing of all the competing cultures. At some point, the species obtains the capability to become interplanetary. We have every reason to expect that a similar interplay between alien civilizations would then take place on a galactic scale, with civilizations overpopulating their planets and vying for the resources of other planets. It seems self-evident, or at least reasonable, to expect that the most aggressive, most resource-hungry, most ruthless, most interested in reproducing civilization would spread most successfully to dominate the majority of the galaxy. So to answer our question, it seems that the most prevalent civilization would most likely overthrow and control newly discovered civilizations, because the most prevalent civilizations were selected through a process of survival that favored exactly that behavior. By analogy, we are in essence contemplating whether the team that won last year's World Cup does or doesn't want to win against a new team. Obviously, the team that survived the extensive process of elimination matches to take the title wants to win. What is the most likely reality? In our society, you're labeled as a kook if you believe in UFOs, but that's not something I care too much about. I'm more interested in knowing what most probably is the reality we live in, whether or not society is ready to accept it or not. We answered 4 questions. Here's how I answered them. I think there's a near 100% chance that we are not alone. I think there's a near 100% chance that other civilizations are millions of years more advanced than we. I think there is a near 100% chance that interstellar space travel is practical based on our observations. Lastly, I think there's a very high probability that advanced civilizations overthrow less advanced civilizations when they encounter them. Whether you are prepared for this or not, the product of these probabilities tells us how likely we think it is that our civilization has been or will be overthrown by aliens. According to my estimates, it's a near certainty. I've been waiting for the smoking gun UFO evidence for decades, but why should I expect that to ever happen? And it's prevented me, as well as mainstream science, from being certain that we're being visited. But this common sense statistical approach is objective and makes it pretty obvious that alien visitation is the most likely scenario. Now that I know that, I see UFO reports a bit differently. What do you get when you multiply your probabilities? You might be surprised to find you also believe an alien takeover is the most likely reality.